How you doing? This is Sean McVeigh with Sean's Outdoor Adventures, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Prime Logic bow. What I want to do is start off by going over some of the specs of the bow, some of the reasons why they've made things the way they have, and then I'm going to shoot it through the chronograph and get all that data, and we'll kind of summarize that at the end. I also want to give a special thanks to Outdoor City here in Altoona, Pennsylvania. We're at their facility today recording, and so I want to say a special thanks to them. I also want to thank Prime because they did really go out of their way to help me make sure I could get this bow in hand to review. So thank you to all you guys at Prime and all you guys who went out of your way. Dustin's sitting over there. Thank you, Dustin. So let's go over some of the specs here. And when I've talked to some of the guys at Prime, and there's been some feedback from the public, you know, one of the things we're seeing very noticeably different this year is there's a split limb, whereas in the past they've had a solid limb. And what they've explained to me, the real reason for that is that they built a shorter axle-to-axle bow here. So in order to get the 31-inch axle-to-axle they now have, they had to make some modifications to the cam system. Because as I'm going to talk about it a little bit in a little more detail, the grip on a Prime is higher on the riser than most manufacturers. So that causes their roller guard to have to be a little bit higher, and that changes some of the angling with the cables going into the cam, so they needed to create a wider cam than they used in the past. And when they had that wider cam with the solid limb, it just got to be a little bit too wide as a solid limb, so they went to a split limb. And you know, one thing that I think is interesting about the Prime cam system, obviously, is you have what appears to be two cams side by side. But one of the neat things, like when I just look at that, I just see that's going to give me more balance when we're talking about four different limbs. To me, that looks like it's going to help keep control of those limbs just by the design of the cam. So that's one thing that I kind of looked at when I saw this. So again, we have the split limb here, and as we come down the riser here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the handle area again. They moved the handle up from what's usually the center of the bow is usually the burger button where the arrow travels past. But they've moved it up so that your hand is the center of the bow to create a bow that'll balance better on its own. Other bows with the handle being lower, you have more weight higher. The idea is that it would tip. So they wanted to create a bow that would balance better. And they also, one thing I didn't mention last year, and I actually didn't really know too much about it, is they have the swerve in their riser. And I've heard a couple reasons for that. One is it creates better rigidity for the riser. And those of you who've been into archery a long time, you remember not too long ago, but years ago, the risers were shorter and the limbs were really long. And so now that we have these longer risers, there's a lot more flexing that can go on with them. And so Prime has created that swerve to help create rigidity there. And also, when I was talking to one of the guys at Prime, it helps to mimic a little bit of that swerve in the riser up here where the sight housing goes. So it's kind of helping it to behave just like the upper portion of the riser. And coming down to the bottom, you'll notice that the bottom cam is smaller than the top cam. Again, that's to help create perfect knock travel coming off the bow with everything else adjusted up. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and shoot this through the chronograph. Right now I have it set up at 65 pounds, and I'm going to shoot around at 65, and then we're going to bump it up to 70 pounds and shoot again. And I'm going to do it all at 5 grains per pound. So the arrow at 65 is going to be 325 grains. And then I have a 425 and a 525. And then when we bump the bow up to 70 pounds, we'll just swap out the field points. It's very solid back wall. I give it a 10 out of 10. And then it's an 8 out of 10 coming off the back wall, and I really feel like that's my favorite. And I was just thinking about this last year, ones that really it felt like you had to push your hand forward to get it off the back wall. In a hunting situation, when your adrenaline's going and stuff like that, that's a challenge that I don't personally want to have to deal with. Like, I can't get my bow to go down. So I think that 8 out of 10 coming off the back wall is a nice happy medium. So I like where they're at with the how it comes off the back wall. And with those limb stops, as this has, it's nice and firm on there. Definitely has that dead in the hand feel. So I went on to shoot this bow at 65 pounds, 85% let off. I shot 325 grain arrow, 425 grain arrow, 525 grain arrow, all 3 times each, just to get, you know, a good synopsis of how the bow was shooting. Then I bumped it up to 70 pounds, did the same thing, 85% let off, shot at 350 grain arrow, 450 grain arrow, 550 grain arrow. So I increased the field points, the weight. And then I dropped it to 80% let off to see if that had any impact at all. Now I'm going to transition into going over all the data I collected, but before I do, I just want to mention that when I was walking out of Outdoor City, they did mention that if you, the viewer, goes in there and mentions this video, they were willing to offer some form of a discount. So make sure when you go in there, you definitely mention that to them. Also, I mean, they got a great facility. They got a 3D indoor range and just a regular indoor range, a shooting range, every kind of bow that you could just about think of, guns, crossbows. So, all right, so I'm actually back home now from doing today's review on the Prime, and I wanted to go over a couple more things on the bow and some of the data that I captured. Firstly, I didn't mention it already, and I learned it in talking to the rep while I was doing the shooting, but they also, Prime has an option where if you like a softer feel coming into the back wall, they do have a cable stop option. We were using the limb stops today. And one thing, like I had somebody, you know, mentioning last year they didn't like a bow because it felt like they were ripping their arm off when they were coming into full draw. And really, for me, what I do when I'm using a bow with limb stops, as I'm reaching full draw, I begin to ease up on the draw when it's a bow that I'm shooting. Like today I was doing a bow, I'm not familiar with the bow, so I was just coming into full draw and it was, you know, a little jerky because I wasn't used to it. But when I'm used to the bow and I know when it's coming into the valley and I can ease up, I just kind of ease up on the draw. And I personally like the limb stops because I like that solid back wall. But everyone has their own preferences, so I'm just sharing that with you. Also, the riser that they have this year has sort of the rigidity of the 7000 series that, you know, like in their bows that last year, the riser is 7000 series aluminum. And that 7000 series is a little bit heavier than the 6000 series that a lot of manufacturers are going with. So the one that came out with this year sort of has the lightness of the 6000 and the rigidity of the 7. Another thing I did is I brought a draw board with me and we checked to make sure the draw stop timing was on, to make sure that the poundage was on and where we wanted it to be and things like that. So let's go over some of the data I captured. Now I shot it was a 70-pound limb bow, but I shot it at 65 pounds first. So this first chart is actually going to be 5 grains per pound, so we're talking 325 grains, 425 grains, 525 grains. The axle to axle length was 30 inches and 13/16. The brace height was 7 1/8 inch. The draw length when we hit full draw was 30 1/4 inch, so it was just beyond 30. The draw weight was 65 pounds, I just mentioned. Now when we were at full draw, it was at 8.9 pounds, and the draw cycle, what I mean there is where in the draw cycle did it hit peak weight, and it was at 23 3/4 inches is where the bow hit peak weight when I was drawing it back drawing it on the draw board. So looking at the speed at 5 grains per pound, 65-pound draw weight on the 70-pound limb, we have 315 feet per second. The noise in decibels was 79.3. The vibration reading came out to 16.7. And then if we look down at the 425 grain, we were at 281, 77.8, 8.8 basically. And the 525 grain, we were at 256.7 feet per second, 76 for the decibel reading, and 12.3 for the vibration. Again, sometimes with those variations in the vibration, that could have to do with even the way I was gripping the bow. So Take the vibration things with a grain of salt. But if we look at the 5 grains per pound bow at 70 pounds, the brace height was just a hair shorter, about 1/16 of an inch shorter. The let off actually changed a little bit as well and increased a little bit. And if we compare the numbers there, it's 321 feet per second at 70 pounds, 5 grain per pound arrow. So you can see the bow was a little more efficient on speed. The noise was 78.7 decibels and the vibration 11.3. Looking at the same readings when it was at 65 pounds, still 5 grains per pound, we can see the bow was more efficient when it was at its peak weight. Looking down now at the next set of next set of arrows, it was 288 feet per second, 77.7 decibels, and 9.37 on the vibration meter. Still coming in a little bit more efficient. And then looking down at the 550 grain arrow, we have 264 feet per second, 77.5 decibels, and 8.7 on the vibration meter. Also want to just point out the control bow. So the first one here is in my basement. The control bow was basically 308 feet per second. And it's got a very spongy back wall. So it could have been I just pulled it a slight bit more into the back wall. 78 decibels was the reading in my basement and 78.7 on site. So pretty close. I mean, 0.7 is decibels. It's pretty close. Now, one last piece of information I want to share with you is, we changed the let off and we changed it to 80% let off because last year people were saying, oh, well, the bow was slow because you had it at the higher let off. So we changed it to 80% let off because there's a lot of bows that only go to 80%, whereas this one was a little over 85, right around 85. And in doing so, we actually had almost identical, but even just a fraction on some of the readings slower of the feet per second. So I shot it just the 5 grain per pound arrow just to see what we came in at. And it basically came in at the 321, we had 2 shots that were at 321 and 1 that was at 320, whereas we had 2 shots at 321 and 1 at 322. So what you actually gain a little bit with the higher percentage let off is a little more draw length. So that's some of the data I got on the prime, and one of the neat things about the bow that I noticed was when I shot it at 65 pounds, it's a 70-pound limb, but when I shot it at 65 pounds, it felt a hair smoother to me. It felt a little better to me than at 70 pounds. And I mentioned that when I was in the shop before I was leaving, and one of the guys that was there was like, yeah, actually I shot it last night and I noticed the same thing. So if that's something to check out if you're interested in the bow and you want to change it. Changing the poundage can actually change the feel of the bow a little bit because you're changing the limbs. It's just changing rotation, and it changes everything a little bit. So definitely give that a try, and I thought it was interesting. So I just want to give a special thanks again to Prime for really going out of their way to help me get this bow review put together, and Dustin, who's a rep for the Prime line. Really appreciate him going way out of his way to help me today. And a special thanks to Outdoor City in Altoona, Pennsylvania. If you haven't been to their shop before, I really encourage you to stop in. They have a huge selection of stuff. Thanks again for tuning in. And make sure if you haven't already subscribed to my channel that you do that little subscribe button. Click the notification icon. When you're on a computer, you can adjust the settings to have it notify you every time I do an upload or go live. Please, again, subscribe, check out my channel, and until then, take care and God bless.